This meeting is being recorded.
All right, here we go. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's Audrey Huntley from No More Silence. We've been very worried and concerned about Don Dumont, and we're really pleased that we're able to speak with some folks who've been working very closely on the ground in Saskatchewan, as well as Christa Big Canoe here in Toronto. But I'll let you introduce yourselves. Darlene?
Yes, my name is Darlene Rose Okemaysim-Sicotte. I reside in Saskatoon and Treaty 6, and I'm from Beardies and Okamasas Cree Nation by town of Duck Lake, and I am the co-chair of Iskwewuk, E-wichiwitochik, English translation, Women Walking Together. And we've been doing this awareness and supports to families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls for 17 years.
Wow, it's a long time. Thank you so much. Christa?
I'm Christa Big Canoe. I was formerly the lead commission counsel on the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. We spent the duration of the National Inquiry traveling across the country, listening to communities and families share their narratives and stories and truths about the types of violence that Indigenous women, girls, two-spirited, gender fluid, transgendered, LGBTQ+ community experience, as well as some hearings from experts, institutional witnesses, and knowledge keepers on these issues, ones that, like Dawn, seem very relevant to an important discourse we need to have when we're talking about how Indigenous women experience violence.
Miigwech, Christa. So going back to you, Darlene, can you tell us a little bit about Dawn? Who is she as a person and as a mom?
Dawn is a strong, beautiful, resilient, intelligent, funny woman that I had the pleasure of going to university with over 30 years ago at the University of Saskatchewan. So I've known her for a very long time, and we sat on student council, and besides doing that, we were friends. You know how at university we hang out together. What I've always known about her is that she's always talking strongly and with such resolve about the injustices of Indigenous people in their country. And she did go on to finish her English degree at the U of S, and then left for a while and went down to the States, and then came back to Canada and went to Queen's to do a law degree. And understand from her mother that she actually took another writing program while she was there as well. And when she came back to us in Saskatchewan in 2013, she resumed. She got a role with the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations in their Special Investigations Unit. And when I reunited with her, she had attended our Sisters in Spirit October 4th annual event. And I was so happy to see her. And, you know, she's like my little sister. I'm about 8 years older than her. And she was still having that energy and that love and that interest, despite all of these people always clamoring to her, because she has that light. She has this light of welcome and warmth and interest, and she knew how to make a moment be serious and then be funny, because that was her way. You know, that was just her nature. And she is a very loved person here in Saskatoon. There's not a time anyone could not contact her and have her not respond. I'll give you an example. On May the 28th was the last time I had spoken with her through a messenger, and I had asked her for some help about finding a missing 9-year-old, and she wrote back right away, and then she followed up. Prior to that, because she's so busy, I'm so busy, we were sick in our house in March, and she came and dropped off all of these cold items for our little kids, and she just popped in, popped out, and I was just so thankful. But that's the kind of person she is, and you'll hear lots of stories in the midst of the up and down feelings and mixed emotions in Saskatoon, that there's all those stories that people don't hear about a person like that. And there's not anything I wouldn't do to help her when she asked. I had a previous friendship like that with the late Trish Montour. It was, as soon as she wrote to you, you got on it. And if you needed her, she got on it. This is just the type of women that I'm lucky to have known and be around and work with.
I understand she was also a published author, a successful career woman. She must have really been facing terrible threat in order to give all of that up. Can you talk a little bit more about the circumstances that led to her leaving?
Well, as her friends, we all see each other have relationships and children, and we know that she's always wanted a child. And unfortunately, this relationship with the father of her child, didn't work out the way it probably she wanted it to go, considering the reason why she's left, why she had to leave. And then that when you give up, a great home, a really strong leadership position with the FSIN, your writing career, you're up for 2 literary awards. When you love so much and you have so much compassion, and it's your child, like, what do? You would do anything. And sometimes that PTSD will have this fight or flight. And how much more could she go to RCMP? How much more could she go to Saskatoon Police Services and not get her needs met, to feel safe? I believe from her mother that she felt like she was being followed, for just before she had gone away. It's just like, these aren't things you imagine, they are real. And I think these are the kind of things we heard over and over during the inquiry, is the policing part. You don't want to imagine you're being followed and stalked. It's really disturbing. And then when you have children, your sensitivity and awareness heightens, and then the fear sets in. And then where do you go? It's a big risk she did, but she did it solely for her safety and her son's. Absolutely.
So many people were worried about her. How, and I'm sure you were too. How did it feel when you heard that she, what was that like when you heard that she had been located and was alive?
I was so relieved. I honestly tell you that there was one night, I think it was Wednesday before she was located, I just could sleep because I was in that stage of worry that this was really bad. And it was somebody I knew and loved and worked with. And I thought, I didn't even think about her socioeconomic status and all these accolades she had. I just thought of her as a person, a human that could have been really hurt and maybe deceased. And how did that happen? That was so strong at that point, and I was so relieved. Me and our co-chair Myrna, we had to pull over the side of the road because a policeman told us at the command site that they were located, and we had to be calm. We didn't want to kind of in front of the policeman say, "Oh, okay." And we just freaked out. Like, we pulled over to the side, we were hyperventilating, we had to go debrief. It was so relieving. We were so like, why? But we had been hearing stuff during the search, so I was so happy. I didn't care what anybody would say. She was alive, her little boy was alive. That's, yes.
Yeah, we're all very, very grateful for that. I'm going to ask Christa, who was senior, as she mentioned in her introduction, senior counsel at the lead counsel at the National Inquiry. I'm just wondering, like, when you reflect on Dawn's story, how does it resonate with much of the testimony that you heard throughout the years? If you could speak to that, Christa.
Absolutely. Like, Dawn's story is definitely something that was shared across the country. in terms specifically of trying to seek institutions' help along the way. It was a very common story to hear, sometimes unfortunately not with a survivor, but with a lost loved one's family member saying, she went to the police multiple times. They wouldn't lay charges against him. And it's not just with the national inquiry, it's been in my practice, throughout the years in advocating for Indigenous women's rights. Very often they're cast as not worthy victims, and that transcends their socioeconomic, their stature, and their achievement. And Dawn demonstrates that. And we saw that in other cases, in one case, an Alberta young woman who was getting her PhD. And, we know Loretta Saunders, it doesn't matter. It doesn't seem to matter when an Indigenous woman has achieved and done success. She's often still not listened to the same way when she's the victim. And we heard that narrative time and time again throughout the course of the national inquiry. I know in my other work, we hear it often. And so, some of the work that was done on the national inquiry were those calls to justice, specifically to police services, not just about laying charges or looking at how you can assist, but also in good communications with families. And what we've heard so far publicly from Dawn is in relation to, filing police reports, talking to child welfare services about her concerns, and nothing happening. And, part of her message was we're going to learn more as she's able to defend her actions. But one of the things we have to keep in mind is there's probably a whole host of things we don't know. And one of the things we also heard on the national inquiry was the way media plays out the story, right? And so we've already heard police services make statements about, oh, those were fully investigated and there wasn't enough grounds to lay charges. But what we also know from the inquiry was the way people characterize, particularly police services characterize when someone should or shouldn't be charged, is not as clear cut as it should be, right? And so, one, we need to know that investigations are actually going forward and are done in a non-biased manner that recognizes the violence and harm that Indigenous women experience. They need to be treated in a way that doesn't look at them on any like post-traumatic stress disorder or, oh, you're overreacting. Like, they need to be given legitimacy when they're making legitimate complaints. And we see that in our work every day. We end up assisting Indigenous women making complaints to police when someone is causing violence against her. And it takes a legal service to get their attention sometimes, and it shouldn't require that. If they are protecting and serving, they need to be taking it seriously the moment the complainant makes a complaint. And same with child welfare services or family law services. You need to recognize and legitimately investigate. And too often we see circumstances where there's an Indigenous woman with a non-Indigenous partner, and on that virtue alone, she's less believed. And law has told us, post the Barton case, after the tragic loss of Cindy Gladue, after all of the things that we've seen after a national inquiry, we should know better and we should be doing better.
Totally agree. So perhaps the most tragic thing right now, though we're so happy that Dawn and her son are alive, is that they are apart. Darlene, what I recently, there has been, Dawn has been able to release a short statement, and we know she wants to come home. Can you speak to that a little bit, Darlene, please?
Absolutely. As a mother, and the reason you fled is to protect the child you're taking with you, and now you're separated and you're further in the trenches of those systems that weren't helping in the first place. So it's really critical that we really understand the mother bond experience, and that there should be access as soon as possible, just to ensure that that child, is being cared for and being safe. For Dawn, that's her biggest reason, as well as facing, and what's the charges in our country, in Canada. So it's really important that we get her back, and she's, I think she'll even feel the even more relief once she even just steps back into the province, regardless if she's going to be incarcerated. At least she'll be around family and friends in our country and our governments.
Christa, what would you say to the benefit of Dawn returning home to face legal issues?
Well, I think, there's a couple things that we have to think about. First of all, we don't know all the facts and story, regardless of how media or police media contacts are sort of spinning the story until we actually get an opportunity. The justice system itself, which hasn't really served Indigenous women and particularly not victims well, does have a couple basic principles that are important. First of all, Dawn, if she's criminally charged, is presumed innocent until proven guilty. And if she has real viable defenses for the action she's taken to protect her child, then we need to give her the opportunity to do that. So clearly, she's being detained in the US, so she hasn't successfully received bail down there. And there has been discussion about extradition and like letting her come home so that she's able. So one of the things I'd note about extradition that I think is important is that it relies on an agreement between two jurisdictions. So in this case, Canada, the US, and they make an agreement. And that takes some of the power away from the individual who's potentially being extradited to determine what can happen in the agreement. So there's a little bit of uncertainty in relation to what extradition would fully look like because it's based on an agreement between those two jurisdictions. One thing I ask and wonder is what diplomatic or diplomacy could be used in this circumstance. Here in Canada, we have a government that has said it's going to implement calls to justice and follow the national inquiry, and they really haven't done that. But we have a Minister of Indigenous Service, Minister Miller, who has made this commitment. He continues to make commitments internationally to Indigenous women, in particular around this particular issue, as well as in the United States. There's Secretary Deb Haaland, who is the U.S. Department of the Interior, and they're taking a number of steps in recognition of the vicious harm that's happening to Indigenous women and the violence that's occurring. And so I think there needs to be some diplomacy. And so, reach out to those politicians to see what diplomatic measures or any can be taken so that Dawn has the opportunity. And I think, in the public statement she made, she has clearly indicated she's willing to face anything that she might be charged with or to go through those processes. And when she comes back to Canada, it's not like, oh, she walks through a border and she's quote unquote scot-free. She would be detained and she would have to answer in the same way as anyone criminally charged with. And it sounds like there will be serious criminal charges. And so she has the right to all the defenses any defendant would have. She has the right to, legal counsel and to demonstrate her actions were required and necessary. But again, I think, just focusing on a justice system or a legal results is not the best way to do this. Like we should know better. We need to do better as entire societies. We can recognize the harm that's been caused to Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirited, and LGBTQ plus. And we can say that and we keep talking about it, but we need to actually action it. And part of actioning it has to look like, one, that conversation, and two, it has to look like involvement. So writing ministers, writing the US Secretary of the US Department of the Interior. It's about leveraging those steps that everyone keeps promising they're going to take to protect Indigenous women and children. And at the end of the day, if everyone has enough faith in the system and the system does run through its course and she's allowed to give her defenses and she's allowed to go through that process, then we don't know what the outcome will be until we hear the truth. But if we don't let her speak the truth, we're stuck with this narrative that time and time again in Canada is figures of authority saying, oh, well, we looked at it, there's no crime. Oh, we don't have to charge him, nothing really happened. We need to ensure that she's having all the opportunities any other defendant would get in a criminal process. And we need to stop and think seriously about prosecuting Indigenous women who are trying to protect themselves and their children.
Such good points, Christa. Thanks so much. Darlene, would you have anything to add?
Yes. um, I think it's so prevalent here in the prairies, the kind of obstacles we have to face. It is one of the hotspots of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And excuse me, it's not an easy province to live in. There is a lot of steps made. Excuse me, and especially here in the city of Saskatoon, we're really doing what we can to build those relationships and to build in a matriarch type, an anti system where we all are working together with our institutions. Sorry, and that this is an example of we can't just talk about it and have advisories and just go to a march or write a letter. We really have to build this stuff into work so people are, we have a right to safety and wellness and mental health. Like this stuff has to change, and we can't put our heads in the sand by going just to a march. There's a lot of hard work, and we have to do it together as best we can. And especially, it's because of our future generations, and her little boy is that future generation.
What can we also do to ensure that he stays safe? Is her family able to connect with him?
That's the other underlying question, because there's always persons of significant interest that are involved in the child's life, the grandmother, aunts and uncles, best friends. These are people that have established relationships with the little boy, and what can we do is to just keep the public aware that Dawn does have rights and rights to access. And upon her return to Saskatchewan, that those rights are resumed somehow, and that we're reassured that he's being well taken care of, and that this situation ensures that we aren't going to overlook that a little boy is involved.
So important. Do either of you have anything to add? I will make sure when we do post this interview that we include the suggestions that Christa put forward, that I'm sure you have, Dawn, for letter writing campaigns. But is there anything that anybody would like to add?
I was just going to say, if you want to add, like, the reality is when someone finds themselves in a situation where they have no hope, when they've tried to reach out to institutions, when they've tried to seek assistance and they still feel like there's nothing left to do, we need to resolve that, like on a community level and on a societal level. And I don't mean Indigenous community. Indigenous community is putting in the work, right? They are trying extremely hard to fill all the gaps that our system just seems to miss. But for instance, and I think Darlene talked about this well, when we talk about mental health issues or access and resources, we need to have those resources available at a more regularity. When we were in the National Inquiry, we heard from the provincial advocate that it's like a 3-year wait list for youth to actually get to be able to speak to a psychiatrist. Like the medical and health wait lists for Indigenous people, particularly status Indians on reserve, is astounding. And so we continue, like we have all these conversations and we know what the root causes of these issues are, and we still don't continue to resolve them. Like we focus this energy and blame and stuff on everything else, and it often falls on the justice system to try to correct things that clearly wouldn't even be before the justice system if we would just take the time to understand and provide the assistance. So when a woman or someone flags that they're experiencing that violence, that's when the support needs to happen. And if police and child welfare institutions aren't kicking in, it can't just be left to community organizations. It has to be like a more concerted effort. We have to start recognizing this as health issues, not just justice issues. And not like, I don't mean when someone's physically sustained injuries because of violence, but like the whole the holistic approach to someone who's experiencing and the impacts of violence, which might not just be physical, and how do we support them in housing? And like in this case, we hear Dawn's a successful business, like a successful person who's a published author, and she's not exempt from violence. And so again, it's that whole like facade that somehow we need to keep pushing and having people understand that it doesn't matter what walk of life you're in or how much you achieve, you still potentially are exposed to violence. And if you're an Indigenous woman, that only increases. And so we need to, if you're calling out to community or seeking support, it letters are helpful, providing funds to really good organizations like the one Darlene works with. Those are all helpful things, but we need to take the next step, right? Like as Canadians, as individuals that want to, as women who want to lift women, we need to take the next step, which is like, how else can we help? What does that look like? Does that mean I continue to advocate beyond? Like, it shouldn't come to situations like Dawn's for us to want to act or to raise these issues on a regular basis. It's a lived reality of far too many Indigenous women in this country, and that's going to take the support, the awareness, acknowledgement, and fight of many others.
Totally agree. Darlene?
I really want people to feel that to not have the fear of supporting her because of the backlash that's vilifying her on social media and the press. The press is just covering the police part of everything, and it's really difficult to weigh through the all those articles that are out there and piecing them all together. And it is overwhelming because we've been also dealing with 2 weeks of searching. So it's going to be coming to a month on August the 22nd that we've been going through this trauma along with Dawn. It's really a time for us to take care of ourselves and to be ready to do the long haul of supporting her and helping her. And I think it's just giving us all more of a chance to show what our human rights are about. We all have a right to safety, and Dawn has a right to safety and care. And that's what I really would like the Canadian public to know, is that we need to step it up. We need to really step it up.
I so agree, and I'm so grateful to you both for the great work that you both do every day and your good words. No More Silence will definitely do what we can to amplify your voices. So miigwech.
You're welcome.
Oh, you need to unmute, Christa, for that.
Miigwech. Sorry, I was just saying miigwech.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. I will be posting this on social media, and we'll be including any information for letter writing and so forth. Have a great day.